Welcome to another class, and this is an exciting one as we've got a guest, I would say lecturer, teacher, I don't know what we're calling them, but Daniell, who's a marketing effectiveness consultant, and he worked on this report with me. I'm really excited because marketing effectiveness is kind of a scary subject for a lot of planners. And especially when we start looking at kind of the new school of thinking around system one and two thinking, and kind of trying to map all these bigger concepts and theories. And Matt got in contact with me about 6 months ago and shared with me how you can actually put all these pieces together, and was able to visualize that through this Cogs analogy. And I thought it was so great. I wanted to share with you. So Matt's going to speak for about 20 minutes on this deck on the cogs of marketing effectiveness. Matt, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jules. So yeah, we came up with these concepts because we were in a large marketing team of about 60, and we were having problems talking about these concepts without overshadowing another area of marketing. So we know all areas of marketing are important, but it's about the concepts, about how they interrelate together. It's not one channel over another. It's not one concept over another. It's about how they all work together. And we were having a bit of trouble kind of visualizing how all of that came together. So this was our way of tying it all together. It seems to produce an easy way when it's a bit more tangible. So I developed this with Pippi Nottage when I was working at IAG, and now I kind of do my own research. And going through each of the cogs, I'll go through how they work and how they relate together. And it's important to understand that these are cogs in that they do work at different rates. So a campaign is, there are cogs that could be shifted out for another, but if you shift one cog out for another, you tend to slow down the production of the whole machine. The whole thing is to get everything moving together in unison, not changing it out because it seems like the right move to do. So the cogs themselves, there are larger and smaller ones, and the larger cogs are more difficult to shift. They do require two things to make it work overall, and it's consistency and time. So you've got to be consistent of what you do and make sure you don't change it because you feel like it, and you've got to give it time to make sure you let it work the way it's supposed to work. And then there are smaller cogs, and those are the things that you can shift in and out with a little bit less risk attached to it. If you change your paid search strategy, for instance, it's not going to have overall effects on how your above the line video campaigns are doing. It might have some effects, but not over massive ones. So it's important to understand it's the difference between the two cogs and how they interrelate. So most important part on this slide is that it's marketing is the sum of all parts. It's not one channel over another. It's not one concept over another. It's how they all interrelate. And this is our attempt to show how the concepts that we outline are interrelated and how they can work for your brands. So we'll start with the most, the largest cog, which is the one that's hardest to move, and that's market share effects. The thing about market share effects is that they are difficult to move, and we attribute this to in established categories it's much more difficult to move, and it's because the brands are fighting for each other. They're stealing customers away from everyone else, and it moves quite fluidly up and down. So brands tend to gain customers and lose customers at the same time. But what you want to change is market share, the proportion that people are paying buying your products more than the competitors. So it's a basic market share. They're directly related to what we call mental availability, which is the probability of buying, the probability of people choosing your brand in a buying scenario. And the reason that it's so directly connected is because it seems to be a predictor of market share change. It's because there's a mental share or a mental availability has something ridiculous like a 0.97 correlation with market share change. So it can be a predictor of both market share gains and losses. It's really important to know that. And secondly, it's affected by extra share of voice. It's also known as excess share of voice. because you tend to need a lot of money to make your brand grow, but you need a lot of money in line with how big your brand is. So it's a good guideline to figuring it out. Moving on, we go through mental availability. So it's the probability that people will choose your brand over the other brands in a buying context. So it's sometimes called brand salience, but it's about the quality and quantity of memory structures. And, you know, the memory structures are how often your brand comes up in a buying context. The buying contexts change all the time. So it can be as simple as searching for a category and you don't have a preferred brand. So I was insurance. I'm just going to keep to an insurance example. The buying scenario is I need car insurance. I'll search for it. Another one is word of mouth. Another one is that you're walking down, you're going into your shopping center and you walk past a branch. These are very common buying contexts and you want the probability of them choosing to be yours. It's important because getting people to think about your brand in more occasions across more scenarios is what is a main pillar of how a brand grows. And we've linked them here in this analogy to distinctive assets and media efficiency. So distinctive assets, so the elements of a brand that people can name that are uniquely related to you. There's a few other definitions of it. And then there's media efficiency, which is, you can spend a lot of money, but it's making sure that you spend a lot of money in a way that people know that the advertising is for you. So you can spend a lot of money in media poorly. You want to spend it correctly. So you can't do it all the time, but you can look at the research and try and figure out the best way of doing it. So physical availability is is, as the name implies, being physically available. You can't be 100% physically available, but you can be available in a lot of buying contexts. So that means being, again, being open for more hours is being more physically available. It means, going to the shops and ensuring that there's enough toilet paper because we've had a toilet paper shortage lately. Making sure that you're physically available, so when people want to make that buying context, when people enter that buying context, that you're physically available to take credit for it. So I relate physical availability to a lot of short-term campaigns where a proven sale, if a marketing channel gives a proven sales result, often it's leveraging physical availability more than mental availability. So, you may see that if only we got 10% more sales, 10% more budget for Facebook acquisition campaigns, that we can just meet our targets. That's actually just leveraging off a purchase occasion. And if you believe that a marketing campaign drives a sales result, you've got to cater for both the mental part and the physically being available part. Directly related to MA, we had the distinctive assets, which is the elements other than the brand name that are being recognized. We often I've got some good examples in the next slide, but it's they're evaluated on two parts, which is uniqueness, which is the amount of times that people only recognize that asset for you. So a good example of that would be Coca-Cola. Their bottle is very specifically designed so that if you show a silhouette of that bottle to somebody, they recognize that that's Coke more often than they recognize that it's Pepsi. And then you've also got to make sure it's famous, so which means that people can enough people know that asset exists and that it's a common sort of asset related to it. And a common way of evaluating distinctive assets is a simple survey method, but it's more about understanding the concept than knowing how to measure it. So they are directly related to media efficiency and mental availability. It's because for a distinctive asset to be distinctive, you have to spend money and get people and make sure people actually see the asset to begin with at all. And so we've got some asset examples here. We try to use Geico for everything, but it's difficult when you can't show more information. So ad style is ad style is probably the most difficult kind of distinctive asset there is, because Geico have a light-hearted kind of tune to their ads where they're often comedic and playing on puns a lot. And that's a distinctive style. Another style that's easy to figure out is Apple's earbuds campaigns from like the early 2000s from iPods. They had very distinctive white earbuds, and they used the silhouette to try and show that that was the thing that they were going for. That was a very unique style. We've got things like slogans, fonts, colors, things that people recognize. So fonts are an interesting one, probably one of the other most difficult ones to get. So if you saw the Mars logo, the logo, but it didn't say Mars, it said something else, what's the chances that you're going to recognize that? Characters are often used as well. Celebrities are as well, but the problem about a celebrity is that you have to keep paying them year after year. So if they become famous and they become uniquely associated with you, that means you have to keep paying them year after year. It becomes more difficult. Big brands can do it. Smaller brands, not so much. That's why smaller brands tend to use, characters that are animated. And we move on to something like creative effectiveness, which means that distinctive assets are great, but you have to have good creative to make sure that people associate those assets with you and have a chance of being shown at all. And I think creative effectiveness is the most important factor, and everyone tries to do it. But it's being creative is not as simple as doing a few things. But there are a few proven ways to make your creative more effective, and it's around the functionality of the ad, not the storytelling element, because the storytelling element is subjective, and you'll never get a measure to understand how that works. But what you can do is refer to the proven ways to make your creative go further. So that means that if you believe the purpose of advertising is to increase sales, and that means you've got to increase the occasions that people think about you in a buying context, the purpose of the creative is to make sure that you show up in more buying scenarios. That means creating more memory structures associated with it. And then it's also about how big and prevalent your logos and distinctive assets are in the ad. There's no point doing really effective creative work if they don't know it's for you. I've seen a lot of bad creative. I've seen a lot of great creative not be correctly attributed to you, to the brand that we were representing, because the branding wasn't there. So I had a nickname for Pippi, who co-wrote this. She was Pippi, always make the logo bigger notch. That was her thing. She always catered for, can we make the logo slightly bigger in this execution? And it's creative effectiveness is probably the hardest one. It's linked to the most things because it has the biggest job to do. It's related to distinctive assets, as well as how you spend your media and into the integrated campaigns themselves. And we'll go on to excess share of voice now. We called it extra share of voice. And that's it relates to how much you should spend in catering for how big your brand is. You can figure it out to a specific point, but there's a few caveats that we haven't stated here. Is that excess share of voice caters for the ability for their brand to grow in consistent environments. If your category is going under a big shift, it means that your category is no longer consistent, and that excess share of voice might not work for you. So it caters for the ability for a brand to grow. It doesn't mean that you can realize that growth. So it's a good principle to understand about how much you should spend in line with your competitors. And it kind of has weird effects in that bigger brands can get away with spending less, and smaller brands have to work harder in their creative effectiveness, but also have to spend more to get there. So that's why it's called excess share of voice. So if you want to have a chance at growing your brand, you have to outspend your market position. Kind of makes sense when you think about it, but you have to spell it out. We did do a way that it can be visualized, because the principle is, in that graph on the bottom left. But if you want to have a chance for your brand to grow, you can, then if you show it in front of a budget owner, the next thing they're going to ask is, what am I going to get out of it? because if you have the potential to increase your market share by 1%, what does that mean to the bottom line? And we did visualize it here, and I always find it's good to cater for multiple scenarios to help people have more tangible conversations. So if you look at excess share of voice research, there's a lot of people that have opinions on it, and it's about making sure you're going in the right direction. So we started with the IPA ESOV impact, which is for every 10 points of excess share of voice, you have a chance of growing 0.5% market share. But then there's adjusted ones. So the IPA also released a paper in 2018 called Effectiveness and Context, which caters for different for different industries. And because it matters, I said before that bigger brands can get away with spending less, smaller brands have to spend more. Effectiveness and Context takes that generalized rule and expands on it for different scenarios. So you can cater for different market contexts when you need to. So if you're a smaller brand, you need to spend more, but you need to spend more consistently. Whereas a bigger brand needs to spend, if they want to grow, they need to spend more, but they can get away with not as spending as much as a smaller brand does. So a bigger brand may go for 5 points of excess share of voice. A smaller brand may go for 10. It's about market context that go around there. And it's important to understand in industry context that there's different decay effects that go for it. And what I mean by that is, in one industry, you may see the market share effects quicker than in another industry. So some move quicker than others. And you have to kind of adjust expectations accordingly. So, and there's some good outlines in that book as well. But moving on from that, we have media efficiency, which is, there's no point spending a large amount of money the wrong way. So that means a good growth strategy, or not growth strategy, a good way of allocating your investment means that you have to have consistent messaging in multiple channels. The more channels you have, the more broad the effects are, but you have to know which channels work for you. So you want to, a good one is TV. Everyone loves TV, but not a lot of brands can invest in TV. So you've got to invest in other channels. You can't just stick to Facebook and YouTube. You've also got to stick to digital advertising where it makes sense for you. And it means you also have to do advertising in, other contexts that may be in local markets as well. So it's about being in more channels more consistently. And then it's also about maximizing reach with minimal frequency. I had a bit of back and forth about this one. And it doesn't matter about the specifics, but as a generalized rule, reach trumps frequency. It is more effective to reach 10 new people than it is to reach the same person 10 times. You might argue that might change per channel, and it definitely does. We had a slide on the cutting room floor that showed the short-term advertising strengths of TV for FMCG, and it showed that if you advertise to a person once per week, you're going to get the same effect as somebody who advertises 5 times per week to the same person. The effect is positive, but not by much, and that changes per channel, per context. But it's important about getting reach over frequency. This is directly related to a lot of things, because media agencies tend to have a lot of fingers in a lot of pockets. So you've got to make sure that you invest at the right levels. You've got to make sure that you co-present your distinctive assets in enough media channels across enough media contexts. And then it's indirectly related to mental availability, because you can't directly choose. There's no written formula for what a good media efficiency is. You have to refer to the proven rules that you know and move outwards from that. And then the last point is that we've got the integrated campaigns, which are, how do you relate all of these concepts down to individualized channels? So I moved ahead of my fire of one. It's important to move away from one channel over another. Paid search isn't going to save you from your sales targets if they're not, if people don't understand you in a long-term context. with, there's other research showing that our campaigns are getting less efficient over time. The way to get more efficient is to invest across a broad set of contexts. If we go back to our original scenario, if we're building this on the basis of market share effects and we're building this off the basis of mental availability, the core principle of mental availability is to be thought of in more buying scenarios. Integrated campaigns are the building blocks of those scenarios, but you have to do the right steps to get there. So with integrated campaigns, you have to invest in the right channels for the channels that are reflective of the category, and maybe resist a few of the shiny things, but go for the ones that work first, and then test and learn where possible. But it's also important because if you're refreshing existing buying scenarios across more contexts, integrated campaigns access people across more touch points. It's about, they may see the TVC for 30 seconds and be totally engaged to the story that you're trying to tell. The purpose of an out-of-home execution is that it refreshes that story, and it refreshes the associations with that story. So you multiply that one scenario across as many channels as you can possibly afford, and be on as long as you can as well. So it has direct effects against media efficiency, it has indirect and direct effects against your distinctive assets because you have to co-present where possible, and that also has an indirect effect on creative effectiveness. And it's because integrated campaigns tend to have culture effects where it gives the impression that the campaign can be larger than it is. So if you see the campaign across TV, out of home, radio, in a 5-week context, that gives you the sense of scale that this advertising campaign has, and that affects the associations that you have with the brands. So it's important to have a tightly integrated campaign to make sure that all of those signals, all of those memory structures are consistent across every touch base. And it's about how they all work together. I hope I've shown how these effects all work together. I found it difficult to try and convince one stakeholder that it's not about one channel. It's not about the individual contribution of this one ad unit. It's about how it all works together, and it's about compounding effects. The things, if you do 5 components correctly out of 10, you're going to be better off than getting 4 components right out of 10. It's about getting momentum and sticking to the story, and investing for time and consistency over changing how the model works. If you decide that one thing isn't working and change it out, consider how that will affect everything else that you're trying to move. Aim for being more consistent across more scenarios. I think that's everything.
Yeah, it's a lot, and I love it because, as I said, the first time I saw it, to visualize these concepts, because I've always had them independently kind of working, and I never knew how they kind of all came together. And it's just so nice to see. And as someone who was working in comms planning, who was kind of, preaching the gospel of integrated campaigns, it's so great to hear that as well, being reinforced by you. And I know there's a number of research. I've got a number of comms planning stats that kind of support this position as well. One thought I'd love to hear from you is that a common piece of feedback that I hear is that this model works for big companies, the CPGs, insurances, the Diageos, who are spending lots of money every day. How do you explain it to the smaller businesses? How do you explain it to the butcher down the road? Well, maybe not that small, but I'm sure you've had smaller businesses who've come to you and said, we just can't spend this much in advertising. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so there's often different ways of planning a campaign, whether you do a burst approach or an always-on approach. The difference between a brand who can invest the time and energy to do a model like this is they face the same underlying principles as everyone else, and the big guys, the only thing they have on a smaller player is they have more information. But the concepts and how they interrelate with each other are crucial for a big brand versus a small brand. If I go down to the local butcher, that butcher's advertising strategy might be that he wants to be physically available in more spaces, so he opens up a second shop down the road, and that's going to be, that means he's only leveraging of one area. But if he wants to get more customers, he has to cater for more buying scenarios, which for a butcher that might mean ensuring that every tourist in town knows that you're the best butcher. The principles that apply still apply to everyone. You have to know that these effects take time, that they need to be consistent, and they have to know it's for you. You'll be surprised at how many big brands don't do all of that consistently. So my advice to smaller players is it's not about it's not about how one brand it's not about how everything can it's not about knowing the exact information that you need. It's about going in the right direction and ensuring you can get there. And if this concept and model helps you, it's perfect. As I said, you can't cater for every one of these concepts, but you can understand them, and you can make sure that if they are the key pillars, if they are useful to how Geico got as big as Geico did, can't you employ that at a smaller level, even if you have 1% market share?
Yeah. No, even knowing the concepts will help you. And yeah, even in that butcher's scenario, you're still saying, hey, you might not be doing the paid advertising, but you're going to try to come up with some messaging that will get to tourists that are coming through your, small country town or whatever it is. Or you're going to find a new category, and you're going to find, even if it's a PR story, you're going to go out to the local news and tell them about your new, lamb dish or cuts that are better than anyone else's.
Yeah. And I suppose like a small restaurant in a small town, there is, people drive a long way to get good experiences. And people will, if a local restaurant, gets a good amount of traction, because of a reviewer that might have gone out of town to go out of his way to find a good restaurant, the principles that we've outlined here still apply. People still have to know where your town is, where you are located, how far away it is, what your pricing is. But then they also, when they come into town, they have to be able to find you, and that means they have to be able to recognize where you are in the town itself, and that means they're going to be looking for they're going to be looking for the same logo that they've read about. So you've got to make sure your distinctive assets work. You have to be effective in your media, that if people search for you, you have to be able to find it. And that scenario occurs, in like 10 different platforms. So that means that you might, like, to give yourself the best chance, you have to maybe cater for 5 of them. And if you take this example, you can create hyper local examples of how it would play out, but it's important to know how they all interrelate, because you can take a small brand and make it bigger. And I suppose there are always reasons that a smaller brand will never grow. But the feedback that I got from this was that we're only catering for largely media effects here, not the marketing effect here. And you can't outspend a bad creative, but you also can't make a shit product grow.
Yeah. I love it.
Like, there are other elements here that are at play as well.
Yeah, totally. Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. You're going to be around. I'm going to put you in the Facebook group. When we put this video up, if anyone's got questions, they can ask you there. So thank you so much for putting this all together.
All right. Thank you for having me, Jules.